This is another Pioneer CT-F950 three-head cassette deck that was born sometime in the late 1970s. These were sold through maybe 1980, maybe 1981 if they still had old stock. This came across my bench from a lot buy where I got a whole group of Pioneer equipment, and this was quite frankly the last thing to get serviced out of the group. And I'll take you through some of the things that I ran into. I'll go off tripod in a minute and kind of take you on a tour. But just to remind you of what the CT-F series is, the CT-F950 had the capability to record on a metal tape. It has it's a three-head deck, only goes in one direction. This particular deck suffered from a couple of issues that one of which kind of threw me. The tape counter would not count up, and normally that means there's something wrong with the meter display, this board. Now I think I have 3 working display boards in stock, and I have the chips that go on it. There's a PD4004 which controls the segments, and I think it's got a counter in it. But the counter wasn't working, and later I discovered, after I got the counter working, that Dolby is a noise reduction method that was used in tape technology to reduce tape hiss. It would boost highs so that the highs would go above the hiss, and then on playback it would bring those highs back down and essentially bring the hiss a few decibels lower on playback. But Dolby, and this is Dolby B, not C, so this is Dolby B, which was on these decks, is activated through some proprietary Pioneer chips that were made by Dolby for Pioneer. And what would happen is that when I would record, the left channel was very, very, very low when I was recording, but then playing back a standard tape with Dolby on, there was no issue at all. So I did some work on the board, and I'm going to take you on a tour of that in just a minute. But what I discovered was the left channel Dolby integrated circuit was bad, or was damaged. I replaced that with a new old stock that I'd sourced on eBay and put that in, and it works perfectly fine. So I'll talk about the troubleshooting steps I did there. A couple of comments about what I normally do on these decks that I did not do on this deck. This deck, I think, had very, very low hours, and what made me determine that is it was very, very clean inside. There was very little dust built up. All of the components that I measured in board with one of my meters were pretty much on spec. So almost all of the capacitors that I did measure on board were measuring right at spec. So there was no need to replace those. The real work was removing this card, and that's always an ordeal because there are a lot of things to disconnect and then reconnect. But one of the things that, of course that was the work, but one of the things that I usually do on a deck that has plenty of hours, or shows that it's got a lot of hours, is I will rebuild the rewind motor. Well, there was no need to rebuild the rewind motor. It was in great shape. Now, some of the other things that I always do with these decks, and you're already aware of it, is I will replace the main belt. I will replace or remanufacture the pinch rollers. So I re-rounded this pinch roller, cleaned it up. It was in good shape. This one, because of the type of deck this is, this capstan is driven by another belt. And what can happen here is the tape, there's a little guide on top. This has to be adjusted in and out particularly. And if you don't adjust this properly, what will happen is the tape coming off of this spool will begin to crease, crinkle, and then basically get eaten by the rest of the tape mechanism. So making sure you've got a good pinch roller on this side. This is an important pinch roller as well, but making sure this is in good shape, that needs to be taken care of. That needs to have a brand new remanufactured pinch roller whenever I do the work on these. Also, this idler wheel needs to get turned, so that's been turned and cleaned. And another thing that made me realize that this did not have a lot of hours is that spring is really springy. Normally I have to take the spring off that's below this and remove a couple of windings from it to sort of strengthen it or put a brand new one in. This one is in great shape. There are other telltale signs which led me to believe that it hadn't been used too much. That being said, I did not do what I have done in the past, which is recap the power supply and recap other components. There just aren't any problems with this deck. So I'm going to go off camera or off tripod and show you a little more about the workings here. Okay, now I'm off tripod. I wanted to point to some sections. This section back here, this was all crunchy. I think that some kind of liquid got spilled in here, and in fact that is the Dolby integrated circuit that ended up being bad, the one on this side. But the reason is that the vents for the unit across the bonnet are going this way, and I think something had been spilled in there. So I cleaned up the board, I replaced the integrated circuit. I also replaced the capacitors surrounding that whole left channel record because I wanted to try that before I started to swap out integrated circuits. But so there was no issue with any of the capacitors. In fact, all the capacitors I took out were at spec. So, but I did replace a couple that were close just to make sure that that wasn't what was causing the issue. Also, as you know, I always take apart that switch. That switch is the Dolby switch. So what I do is I slide the switch out. I run a large cotton swab up inside there with Brasso, and then I clean it to make sure I get all of those contacts on the inside cleaned. And then there are contacts on this that slide in. I do this with the deck up on its left-hand side so that I don't lose the contactors that are actually on the stock that goes in. As I said, I had replaced or I'd taken out this board and done work on it. I put all new transistors on this board as well. I happen to have a whole set that works for this board. I also, when I was doing the work on the counter, this is the board that has the photo interrupter, and that photo interrupter, there's a wheel that actually passes through the photo interrupter. I'll give you a picture of that from the manual, but that's what will send power on these high and low, which gets transmitted back to the board here, which then goes through a series of transistors and eventually makes it back to the 4004, which is what I thought might have been the culprit. The 4004, generally speaking, handles all the segments on the meters, but there was a line that was going over to the 4004. My thought was it could be bad. It was not. I have several PD 4004s that I keep separate so that I can do that kind of maintenance. So those were the major issues outside of, as I said, the mechanical work that always has to be done on the mechanism itself. But that was it. And so what we'll do is we'll get into tests, and you'll be able to hear it and see it working. And I'll slide the cover back on, and I'll put the bonnet on at the very end. We'll get some beauty shots and get this thing up on eBay. Thank you. So I'll be conducting some tests, as I normally do, with this unit. And what we'll be doing is we're going to be testing just a standard tape, a CR02 or chromium dioxide high bias tape. We'll also test a very rare ferrochrome tape, FECR tape. This unit has an FECR setting. This was born in the late 70s. Ferrochrome tapes. Sony stopped production in 1985. And then, of course, we'll do a metal tape. So let's get started testing. For each test, we will use a test tape, zero the meter, set the tape to the type tape it needs to be. This is always set to 6. There's a detent here. We'll adjust the input as we need to. I'm going to be listening to tape and not source, so I want to hear what's actually being recorded. Now I'll start with source as we cue it up and start to play. I'm going to use Dolby as well. That'll enhance the high end. We'll be using the YouTube audio library, so I'm just going to choose an arbitrary item. I'll go ahead and choose that now. Let's see how it sounds. You're hearing this over some studio speakers, which should be sufficient for us just to do a quick playback test. If you want the MP3s of what came off of the tape, I can supply those. So, sounds good. We're going to start recording. This is the source coming in. And this is what's actually been recorded on the tape as we record. A little high. Now we'll play that back. Sounds pretty good on a standard tape. Now we'll go ahead and we're going to go to a chrome or a high bias tape. Sort of the same thing. I'll use the same source that we just listened to. But this time I want to make sure I've got it set for CR02. I do. I have not changed the bias. I'm going to leave that alone. Let's go ahead and back this up. sounds pretty good on CRO2. Now we're going to do testing on the FECR and of course the metal tape next. Do the same thing on a ferrochrome tape. I'm just going to set this in here. I'm going to set that to ferrochrome. I'm going to start my music over again and see what we get. Now this is a ferrochrome tape. So the ferrochrome tape sounds pretty good. Of course, you're not going to find a lot of these anymore, but just in case you were going to try to resurrect your ferrochrome tape selection that you have at home, you at least have something to play and record. And then we'll do metal. Now the big thing about the metal tapes is, of course, this is one of the things that happened with this deck when they released it, is the difference between the 900 and the 950 is that this will record on a metal tape. That requires a lot more power going to the recording head, actually the erase head, which sets the sort of clears off the tape, and then the bias for the record head has to be different for metal tapes. So you will get a better signal to noise ratio with a metal tape, although these days I really don't see the point in buying or using them, but I'm going to do a test here so you can hear how it sounds. So same selection. Now remember, you are going to hear the same thing that's being recorded as was being recorded at the time when I had the tape monitor in. Here's the playback of that selection. Now using these different tape types, obviously, as long as you select the proper type on the unit, you will be able to record on those tapes. You can play back any of these tapes on any of these selections that's immaterial. The selection actually has an equalization that it applies to the tape when you're playing it back as well as when you're recording it, but if you recorded on, let's just say, a standard tape like this one, standard tape, as I said before, and you can do whatever you want to with it, but you do have to record it using the standard setting. I've got this set to Dolby, and we're going to listen to this. I'm going to start the YouTube selection over again, and this is a different selection, so we'll see how that sounds. You can change, this outer ring can adjust the inner ring can adjust separately. So if for some reason balance seems to be a little off on the recording input, you can modify these just by twisting one over the other. Now we'll listen to that. You can adjust up your output volume here, but when you're recording, you leave it at 6. So overall, the unit acts and works pretty much as it did when it was brand new. I would say that there are some adjustments that could probably be improved to some degree. I did not recap the entire chassis. I didn't think that was necessary. I sort of have a separate video about recapping, but I did do what troubleshooting I needed to do to get this working pretty much perfectly. So I've been recording tapes and playing them on other systems I have. That's a standard QA cycle I have, and at this point this unit's pretty much ready to list on eBay. Okay, so I'm going to go off tripod so I can point out some things. I'll do some detail pictures as well, but I want you to see some of the blemishes that are on this. The good news is the corners look pretty good. There obviously is a little bit of abrasion here. I did a little bit just to sort of help clean that up, but for the most part the mechanism looks pretty good. Same thing down here, this looks really nice. So you always have to look for the corners on these. I've had quite a few where the corners are really torn up. I did polish all of the knobs and buttons. Really clean stenciling, nobody rubbed that off. Really no nicks to talk about here. I was going to, I was going to actually paint the top, and to be honest, after I cleaned the top really well, there are some minor blemishes on it, but overall the top looks really good. So I didn't do anything with the top, with the bonnet, I should call it. It's called the bonnet. I really didn't do anything with it, but I'll take some high-res pictures, and they'll be in the video and on the listing. And then I'll take some beauty shots as well.